Welcome back to another edition of Irish Illustrated Insider. It is Monday, June 23rd. I'm Tim O'Malley, joined today by Tim Priester and Eric Thomas of Irish Illustrated and John Bryce of Football Scoop. And JB and Tim, the last time we got together, we previewed what Notre Dame was going to do over the weekend in recruiting. Now we have Eric on, can talk about what has actually happened. Friday, of course, was, I guess, minor surprise of the timing for Kerry Adams, considering he was on the Oregon official visit, committing to Notre Dame, four-star corner. And of course, Joey O'Brien, everybody had their radio dial set for 7:15 on Friday, and that came to fruition for the five-star safety. And of course, no podcast jinx, Tim Priester. I should turn it over to you real fast because Preston
lucky.
Frizzell, we got it in under the wire. We had a commitment here, Preston Frizzell, and I know you're a fan.
Yeah, big fan of his. When did Grayson McKeo commit? Was that
We
June
talked.
18th?
We talked about that on the
okay?
podcast
Yeah,
as
they're
well.
all they're all running together now, and that's a good
Yes.
thing because they're really piling on. No, I love Frizzell. Rated the number 706 composite prospect in the country. That's not going to do much for the ranking, but it's going to do a hell of a lot for the Notre Dame football team because he's a good football player. I've talked about him a bunch. He's mainly an unattached tight end. I think he's a matchup problem. We threw out the name Tyler Eifert the last time, not suggesting he's a first round draft pick, but just the former high school receiver who became a tight end on the next level. I think, again, not Tyler Warren, but I think Frizzell's a real matchup problems for defenses on the college level. Long arms, find seams and zones, and create separation at the line of scrimmage and as the ball is getting to him. I think it's a really terrific catch for Notre Dame. His ranking, Eric, I'm sure, is going to rise up considerably to match the school that he just signed with, but I think he's a sensational prospect.
Absolutely agree. Yeah, Frizzell is an interesting one too, because obviously last cycle Notre Dame attempted to get two tight ends, right? They had Nate Roberts early on, and then Nate kind of fell out of the class to go to Ohio State, and they ended up signing just James Flanagan, made a push at another tight end late. For Notre Dame to get that pass catching body, to get that receiving threat in the class, and to be able to build out the tight end room with a skill set like that early on in 2026, I think it was really important for them to be able to check off the box. And Frizzell's about as high end of a pass catching tight end as you're going to be able to find in this class.
Now, Ian Premer is that too. What's the latest on him?
Yeah. It's interesting. I've spoken with a few sources nationally on Premer here in the last few days. The overall sense on him is that he still does want to stay local, is that's going to be kind of a deciding factor for him. And obviously there's three schools that check that box a little bit better than Notre Dame in Kansas State, and Iowa State. That said, the feedback coming out of his Notre Dame official visit is that everything that they presented to him was well received, that as a kid who's kind of notoriously private and doesn't like to give a lot of detailed insight into his thought process or leanings, they felt that there was a lot of good reaction and responsiveness throughout the course of the visit to what they were putting in front of him. And quite frankly, what I'm hearing from sources on the Notre Dame side of things is very similar to what happened with his unofficial visit, which is Notre Dame felt very confident, but there was a little bit of an air of like, well, he's kind of quiet. We don't know how to read that. How do we interpret this? And then it kind of came out on the wash on the back end that Notre Dame had actually made about as strong or even potentially stronger of a move than they originally intended. So I think for Notre Dame, if you're looking at where they're situated, it's probably about as good as it could be for Premer, given some of the working deciding factors for him, I guess you would call them. But I still think when it all comes down to it, locality seems to be the number one factor, and Notre Dame's not going to win that race.
And Eric, just want to circle back real fast because the three of us talked plenty about O'Brien and Adams. This is probably the time, not just those two, but the 10-day official visit sprint that Notre Dame had that you guys were all over. I think it was more fun than even most people anticipated because they got the commitments to pop in. See, timeline recruiting, Priester, it is the most important thing in the world. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, when it goes in your favor.
Yeah.
No, it's definitely been a really, really productive 10-day stretch for Notre Dame. When you talk about the they already had sort of like the spine of their class built, right? They had a strong offensive line. They had 2 running backs, they had a quarterback. They had the foundations of their defensive line group. But now they're starting to really fill that in with specific talents that they need to round out this group. I'll kind of start from the beginning. Priester already mentioned Grayson McKeo. He's an excellent tackle prospect, a little lean right now, but obviously a very mobile guy. He's a pure tackle, great mobility, can kick out, handle the edge with no problem. I think he'll be able to handle the left side with no problem, which is something that we talk about a lot. And there was actually a little bit of kind of a savviness to that recruitment because Notre Dame and Penn State were both going for a pair of tackles. It was Grayson McKea and Charlie Tom, a Notre Dame legacy. And basically, the presumption from speaking with people on both sides going into the official visit weekend last weekend was that Notre Dame and Penn State would split those 2 tackles. One would get Tom, one would get Grayson. Well, Notre Dame told Grayson on his visit that if he didn't decide in a certain amount of time, they were probably going to move on to Tom. They had to. So Grayson went through his process. He decided, you know what? I got a little bit of pressure. I got to make a decision. I want to go to Notre Dame. Let's do it. He made his decision a little bit earlier than was initially anticipated. And then Notre Dame offered Charlie Tom about 5 minutes later and is now expected to get both of them. So there is quite a bit of savviness in the way that they approach that to build out the tackle room. Tom just wrapped up his official visit on Sunday. And then when you go to the defensive backs you mentioned, it's difficult, even in last year's haul of 6 guys who I was pretty high on. It's difficult to imagine Notre Dame getting a better group of just prospects out of high school in the defensive backs room than they have now. Obviously, Aiden Pouncey is a guy that we shouldn't take for granted as an already committed prospect. He is a phenomenal defensive back, whether he's going to be a corner or safety. Chaz Smith is a high-end corner who's already in the class. And then you added Kari Adams, who I've written about as he's kind of like your prototypical boundary corner. He's got excellent length. He's got just a viciously quick back pedal. He's so fluid in his change of direction when he shifts his weight, from his back to trying to flip and keep his hips in line on sticky coverage. Everything Adams does from a technical standpoint really impresses me, especially at his current length and size. And as far as like corners in this class go, pure corners, because I know there's been discussion of like Pouncey could play corner, O'Brien could play corner. Let's make one thing clear. Adams is probably the best like pure corner Notre Dame could have gotten in this class. And then the other one, obviously, Joey O'Brien. I have called him a number of things. Most recently, I've been going with like 5-star mutant because he can just do just about whatever you want. His best path forward is going to be at safety. He is a nightmare for passing lanes. He is a nightmare when he can maximize his range and his coverage, ability where he's actually creating problems for the offense. If you put him at a corner, I thought Priester's film review is apt. You're kind of limiting his ability to impact the field, even if he does have the skill set. And then on the other side of things, I wrote this the other week. Is he necessarily the best receiver prospect, even that they could land in this class? No. But does he have a skill set and size that is going to give nightmares to future accountants outside? Yes. So I do think he could play boundary receiver and provide value for Notre Dame at the college level, especially. After that, you're probably going to see him start to become more of a specialist.
JB, you talked about O'Brien already, but just your overview of this OV announcements that are probably not over yet.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the thing is, we talked way back in January and February about how Notre Dame expected this bump to happen in the summer, and I was just doing the math. They've got 20 guys committed. 13 of those commitments have come since April 5th. So that tells you the work that this staff has put in. That tells you that their deliberate, very thorough, and nuanced approach is working. And I know we'll get into this because of a question I already peeked ahead at, but it also, again, reinforces what we have long known about Marcus Freeman. He starts the recruiting at the top and he leads the recruiting from the top down. And I think all of that is very evident in what Notre Dame is doing. And then when you also look at some of the other factors, like their average rating per recruit, they're number 2 or number 3 in the country in that regard. USC has 19 4 stars committed. I think Notre Dame has 18 4 and 5 stars committed. So the Irish are right there knocking at the doorstep. I think the depth, the quality of the depth in this class is among the deeper we've seen in the last several years.
Priester, we get questions a lot of, is this the best since? And it's difficult for defensive backs. There's a lot of questions on the board. Is this the best ever 2-year haul? Situations like that at defensive back. It's tough to compare to the ones in 90 and 91 or that range because the anecdote, we can't get away from the fact that we know there was 3 first-round draft picks out of that, or 2 first-round draft picks out of that group, and 4 guys drafted in the first 3 rounds, and 2 more guys drafted the next year from that. It's insane, but it's in retrospect. So I can't recall in the recruiting era, of course, this is the best, but like it's really hard to compare to the Holtz era because they were just the number 1 rated class 4 straight years, and all the guys went pro. So I'm not sure.
Yeah, and a lot, there was a lot of this going on at the time, running backs being converted into defensive backs, whereas most of these guys are,
Yes.
I mean, a guy like O'Brien, obviously, Eric, I agree. Like, I think you can take the whole concept of, playing both ways, Travis Hunter, all of that stuff. I think you could use, if you want to use O'Brien in the red zone, offensively, go ahead and do that. He's tremendous back shoulder throws. So there's some spots there, but I think that's just kind of getting a little bit too far out on a limb, with a guy like that. But Tim, yeah, to me, there are a lot of comparisons to the Holtz era going on here. We've talked about, when have they ever had this much depth? I don't think they've had this much depth since not right at the end of Lou Holtz's career, because he would admit himself that he didn't maybe push as hard as he was recruiting early on with the Vinny Serratos of the world. But I think there's a lot of precedents being set here that Notre Dame hasn't touched for a few decades now. What I would like to make sure that I want Eric to address. I mean, I think 2 of the guys that have visited not only this past weekend but the weekend before that are the most important as I look at it. Caden Finley to me is just a phenomenal wide receiver without blazing speed. And then I really, I wonder if Alistair Vallejo is giving some second thoughts to his decision a little while back. But to me, that raises the importance of Elijah Golden getting in this Notre Dame class. And I hate his lack of knee bend. He tries to do everything with his upper body, but I mean, that's the guy. Those 2 guys, I think, Caden Finley and Elijah Golden are 2 guys that I have at the top of the list of needs for Notre Dame.
Yeah. Um, it's definitely trending the right way with both cases. With Finley, it's interesting because obviously he's a Texas legacy. His dad was a big name for the University of Texas and then the NFL. There's a connection there. But with that said, Finley is not your run of the mill like Texas legacy kid, even for someone who grew up in Texas. For example, he originally grew up in Green Bay. He's from the Midwest. He has strong connections to the Midwest and has told several people that he loves that area. He loves the people in the Midwest. He still feels connected to the region. And there's a lot sort of pushing for Notre Dame on that side that typically wouldn't be going their way for a Texas legacy from Alito. Um, Coming out of his Texas official visit this weekend, there doesn't seem to be a surge of confidence in Austin about them having retaken the lead, which was the presumption for the last few weeks. Speaking with sources down there, I've spoken with a number of folks down in Texas over the last few weeks on this. When things were surging for Texas and when we were hearing that, a lot of that was based on the fact that privately there was conversations with the Texas staff about how do we get this to close with Caden. It seemed like he was a little bit receptive to those. There was confidence in that room that they could get him ahead of the OVs, which didn't happen. There was confidence that potentially they could get him on campus before his OV, which didn't happen. He made it to Notre Dame instead. So there was different things working for Texas that gave them a lot of confidence, kind of rounding that final corner. Notre Dame totally stole that momentum with those 2 trips in 2 weeks and firmly took the lead in this race. Now, how big is that lead? If you ask Notre Dame sources, it's not close. If you ask people down in Texas, I think they were more willing to say, it's kind of tight, going into the weekend. But I think coming out of it, it's starting to show that this is looking like Notre Dame's race to lose. And the last addendum I'll throw before flipping into Elijah Golden, the nice thing about a prospect like Caden Finley with an NFL father is if Texas were to try to do the classic end of cycle, hey, how do we change your mind? Maybe give you a little flavor. That's not going to work as well for someone whose dad was in the NFL and has been financially responsible. So Notre Dame does have a little bit of a hedge comparatively with Finley compared to some other recruits. And then Elijah Golden we'll talk about. He just wrapped up his visit. I spoke with him last night. I spoke with Elijah after every single one of his visits, just checking in to see how things were going. And he's always been very honest and responsive with me. I think he had a positive experience throughout all of his official visits, and yet from the feedback, it is very clear that Notre Dame differentiated themselves, even in his own mind. The way he talked about those visits was dramatically different when you look at Notre Dame versus like Alabama, Oklahoma, any of the other ones. Um, Tim, you mentioned it. Alistair Vallejo went to Michigan. Mikhail Blade went to Michigan. We have a few guys who have made decisions here recently that have really limited that top end of the Notre Dame defensive line board and kind of put Notre Dame, in a situation where uh, Golden is necessary, right? He is a necessary add for them to round out that class. Based on what we're hearing coming out of the weekend, I still expect Notre Dame to get that done. I think they pretty firmly put themselves ahead of Alabama. Alabama has a more robust board to attack at this point. So in terms of the need to push, they're not going to quite have the same, kick from behind that Notre Dame is to get this done. So all in all, I think it lends itself to Notre Dame being able to get this race done probably sometime in July. It's a little bit uncertain, Elijah said.
Speaking of timeline recruiting, a rising high school junior has been invited to attend the University of Notre Dame, guys, and it seems so fun. Notre Dame invited too, finally. As Eric pointed out, I did not know this. They were the last Power Four program to extend an offer to a 2027 quarterback, both Teddy Gerard from Kennesaw and also Peyton Houston from Evangel Christian Academy in Shreveport. We had Shreveport on our last podcast, so we'll refrain from talking more about that town. But Eric, what were the differentiators here for Coach Gaduli to extend these two offers?
Yeah. Well, I'll start with Gerard. He was technically first. He worked out for the coaches privately on June 5th, day before Irish invasion. There was some anticipation at the time that he was going to become the first quarterback to get offered. When he left campus without that, it was a little bit surprising. But what came out in the wash is that Notre Dame was planning to do this, go through the evaluation period, offer a few guys kind of here at the end of summer, and then there's a handful of guys. Malachi Ziegler being one, Emmett Queen being another from down in Kentucky that they're evaluating into the beginning of the season. So there's still room for this board to expand come fall. But for Gerard, big arm. He's from down in Georgia. He's 6'3", got a cannon attached to his arm. And I think the biggest thing for him is that he made seismic leaps from his freshman to his sophomore year as a starter. He improved in every statistical category, whether it was his overall efficiency, whether it was, that's completion percentage, that's his actual yards. He like almost doubled his touchdowns while having his interceptions. He's not an especially dangerous runner of the football, although he is quite mobile. So he is one of those guys who can, make a pass rusher, kind of leave his cleats and then get a little pop pass off or something in the background. He's able to do that kind of secondary motion. For Notre Dame, I think they like the idea of big body, big arm, mobile enough to, create pocket. That's something that differentiated. And within his workout, it sounds like he was quite accurate and was able to demonstrate what Notre Dame feels is, a potential NFL caliber arm. Just a lot of different angles, a lot of arm strength, a lot of ability to place the ball where it needed to be at different areas of the field. Peyton Houston is quite a bit different. He's like 5'10". When he runs, you kind of hear like the Kyler Murray cartoon steps, like. But he is a very, very good runner. Last year, he was an excellent dual threat. He is very quick. When you watch him on film, he kind of does that high school thing that can drive people nuts where you're like, why is he trying to run around everybody? But he can run around everybody, so it doesn't really matter. When he gets to the college level, obviously he might need to develop a little bit more of that lower body strength to work through some of those tackles if he wants to be as effective as a runner. But for his size, he runs with pretty good power at the high school level. And he doesn't maybe have like the howitzer of a downfield arm that Gerard has, but he has plenty of velocity on the ball and he throws everything like just on a rope. Like there's 70% completion last year in his first year as a starter. Like that's pretty absurd for your first year stepping into things in a 12-game sample. So when you want to talk about just like developmental accuracy over time, that's Gerard. If you want to talk about a guy who just kind of came out of the gates swinging and looks like, oh, okay, this is different. That's your Peyton Houston.
JB, any truth to the rumor that you prefer Gerard because Kennesaw's 23 minutes to Truist Park for the Braves game? You're going to go down and scout him?
Yeah, I'm actually going to be in Atlanta later this week for a coaches symposium. So the head is already working about how much I can multitask and just what all of those multitasks can include. But his frame is great. You like that. And he's also, in talking to people, he's got a frame that is going to wear some really good muscle and add some mass and just continue to enhance. The belief is he'll continue to enhance his arm strength, which is already a really big asset and a really big part of his game.
JB, maybe you can get contact Snitker and see if he can get you a pass for a game down there in Atlanta?
Yeah, I would not, I might have some contacts with the Braves, but I would not go that route. So not the Brian Snicker route.
Over the weekend, Tim Priester had a fascinating story about Katie Lonergan, who, if you were to look her up, you would see first Associate Athletics Director, Strategic Football Communications at Notre Dame. But I think the key to it is advisor to the head football coach. And I'm not sure that was actually a title we would have thought necessary prior to this era, where everything is on social media. And she does a lot more than that. But Priester wanted to go ahead and take us through your process for researching that story and talking to Freeman and Katie.
Yeah, what often happens with these long form stories is you go into it. I mean, I think we've all thought that Katie Lonergan's a real pro, a real professional, and that I thought there was a good story there. But then you start delving into her and I had a conversation. I think we did our interview in March near the Notre Dame campus, and there was she said some great stuff about Marcus Freeman, which I thought was important in the story. But it was basically a story about Katie, and then you start digging a little bit deeper, and she starts. I mean, I think it expanded when she talked about Marcus Freeman wanting to speak to the head of the food service that feeds the Notre Dame players, and wanted to make sure that Deron Pines, all of their employees wore name tags so that he could identify them and the players could identify them, and they could speak on personal terms with the people that were serving them the food. And Freeman's idea was our nutrition as a football team is important, therefore the people that feed us is important. And that, I mean, I just thought that was fascinating. I ended up interviewing Deron Pines. I ended up interviewing Tim O'Brien, who's a supervisor for the Shields project, because Lonergan and Freeman were coming back from a charitable event, and Katie made the observation of the crane operator and the precision and the science behind it, which got Marcus Freeman to thinking about how he could apply that to his football team. And so he met with Tim O'Brien. Anyway, I ended up talking to these two people, and Katie's responsibilities, which we knew were vast, were even much greater than I anticipated until I sat down with her. So I can't do it justice in a few words. I would recommend this is a great reason, or I think this is another reason why you should be a subscriber to Irish Illustrated stories like this that appear on our website. Katie deserves it. She was very appreciative. I think she was with a bunch of friends and family when she got about 50 texts from people when the story hit yesterday. And I just, when you interview people like that and the story unfolds like it does, there's a lot of layers to it, and you have to kind of piece it together. But when it comes together, I think it's a pretty good read.
I was going to say, Tim, because of the commitment today and our recruiting team's ability to put out relevant stories. If you want to read Tim's story, I think the best way to do is go to our message board where it's pinned to the top, or the news section in Irish Illustrated, because you just got to scroll down a couple stories. But you can blame Eric Thomas and Brian Alt and Tom Loy and everyone else for covering recruiting very well, because Sunday day's story is now pinned to the top of the page. If you're looking to upgrade your wardrobe, founded by Notre Dame alum Go Wang, you've probably seen ESQ's custom clothing on the player walk and all of your favorite players and coaches. With more than a decade of making the best bespoke clothing available, ESQ will help you look and feel your best. From a perfect fitting suit or sport coat, shirt or bomber jacket, or that perfect tuxedo for wedding season, check out esqclothing.com and book an appointment to upgrade your wardrobe today. Mention Irish Illustrated and get 10% off your entire purchase. That's esqclothing.com. We'll be back with segment 2, Burning Up the Boards.
Segment 2, we call it Burning Up the Boards. We start with a question from Howens22. Can you discuss / rank the factors that have led to the increased success in recruiting compared to, say, 5 years ago? More active recruiting head coach, NIL operation in order, proof of concept in the postseason, or anything else I'm forgetting? What's the most important difference?
That's a good question. I think the head coach and kind of getting that top down approach is going to be where I would want to start that conversation, right? I think that Brian Kelly's approach to recruiting is often maybe a little bit misunderstood in that he wasn't involved, quote unquote. He was involved. He was the closer. There was an operational role for him in that. But Marcus kind of being the tip of the spear for so many of these recruiting processes, or filtering that through his assistants and him kind of balancing that, is a massive, massive flip for Notre Dame. I think the NIL operation is something to mention here, specifically with regards to the impending house settlement and kind of how some of these things are going to change for Notre Dame. As we've discussed, previously on Irish Illustrated, there was always a willingness to compete and put the roster together. Notre Dame was willing to pay for retention. Notre Dame was willing to keep its guys in place. And now with the revenue sharing and everything else, Bryce has talked about this extensively. It seems like Notre Dame is even more willing to be aggressive in that roster building component and kind of put themselves out there a little bit more. Whereas a few years ago, that was a little bit more uncomfortable for them and for the power brokers that be in the background there. It seems like comfortability there has come along as the process has kind of opened up to more of that professionalized model. So looking there, I think there's going to be more growth for Notre Dame on the NIL side, but getting that up and running over the past 3 years has been critical. And then one I'll throw out there, it's proof of concept in the postseason, but I think for Notre Dame to not only get the proof of concept in the postseason of getting there in the past, obviously they did that twice under Kelly as well, but winning games against bloods, Georgia, Penn State, are such massive wins for Notre Dame to have under their belt in this modern era of college football. I know Penn State's another program that's kind of in that same tier as Notre Dame, trying to push themselves to the top upper echelon. Georgia is very clearly there. So to be able to down not only two teams in that arena and in that stage, but to do it all in one run like this playoff run allowed. I think for recruits, when they see that, there is real validity that comes from like, oh, they beat Georgia. Okay, that's a big deal. I need to look at Notre Dame a little bit more seriously because before I thought I had to go to Georgia because that's how I was going to win a title. So I think that stage and that run of wins, when you talk about proof of concept, is specifically important because if Notre Dame had done what Penn State did and beat Boise State and SMU, I don't think that proof of concept is quite the same, even if the number of playoff wins are the same.
And
JB?
I would just add that Notre Dame opened last year with College Game Day and College Station and went out and handled its business. And even in some of the ESPN Game Day contests that Notre Dame hasn't won under Marcus Freeman, it's acquitted itself very well. We alluded to this in the first segment. Marcus Freeman has come in with recruiting at the very quintessential pillar of the foundation of his program. And he's point blank said he'll be the lead recruiter on every single person that they intend to take and get committed. So I think all of those factors are combining together. And then to use Tim O'Malley's favorite word, like Notre Dame has some riz about it now. Like the Irish are cool again. Marcus Freeman has been a huge part of that. The people behind the scenes, Fighting Irish Media, their sleek productions, I think, have been a big part of that. They've done some greater stuff in recent years on National Signing Days to spotlight the signees that have gotten a lot of traction on social media. Eric knows this better than me, but those are the factors that I see. Those are the factors that I hear. And I've shared this before. I'll share it again from DFO meetings last month in Dallas to the year before to some other GM talks that I have around the country with people, especially in SEC country. SEC GMs tell me now, like, hey, we have to pay attention to Notre Dame. 5 years ago, we just didn't pay attention to Notre Dame. Now, that can be Marcus Freeman. That can be changes in the landscape. That can be NIL leveling the playing field a bit more because everybody's getting paid and not just, people in the South. So I think all of those are factors, but it absolutely starts at the very tip top with Marcus Freeman, and he's made Notre Dame cool again. And then I do want to add real quickly that I think is important to note Marcus Freeman's embrace of former letter winners and also Marcus Freeman's embrace of prominent alums. There's prominent alums that do a hell of a lot of heavy lifting in recruiting that are almost on call 24 hours a day for Notre Dame to talk to recruits' parents, to help answer questions about what Notre Dame is going to do for them. As Notre Dame says, the 4 for 40, not just the 4-year decision. And then the former letter winners, there were a number of back the weekend of Irish invasion, and with some of those camps going on, I think there were 15 to 20 former letter winners who came back for the specialist camp. Reggie Ho was on campus to work the Notre Dame specialist camp at the end of May, 1st of June, just to give you an idea of how effectively Notre Dame has reached into its past and embraced those people. And I do think it helps young kids see when they go talk to former players, and Reggie Ho's this success, or Ray Herring has this great role on campus now. And these guys see that, and they're players who walked in their shoes before them.
Reggie Ho was my dad's student in 1988, JB. I don't know if you ever knew that or not. I know TJP knows that. He's a little smarter than most of the students. No offense.
Oh, yeah, just a touch. He just beat me out in grade point average. Eric's point about, I mean, not only did Notre Dame beat Georgia, they outcoached Georgia. It was a thorough victory on their part. The only thing I'd throw in, Chad Bowden was a very good recruiting coordinator. Mike Martin had experience as a general manager on the professional level. I think that has changed the dynamics of the way that has all run. JB can answer that better, but I think Mike Martin's background in the NFL, where you had to evaluate the value of each one of the components on your team, I think that's been a big advantage for them as well.
Yeah, I think that they had already gone to that model. Chad Bowden and Marcus Freeman had already tiered a structure where they kind of identified each position and placed monetary values on it and how they wanted to allocate funds for each respective position on the on the roster. But certainly Mike Martin's depth of experience in the NFL and his vast knowledge helps them construct that and fine-tune it even better.
This one from Weiss Guy, that's for you guys. I'm sure you all agree with Jadarian Price at the top of O'Malley's Next 22 article. He's referencing the technical non-starters. Who are some players you project to be higher and lower? And Weiss Guy says he'd like to see Jalen Sneed and Logan Thomas higher. Sneed I had at 5 on the list and Thomas at 19th. And as I pointed out off the air, he did not list a guy that should be lower, which is what usually happens when people are talking about underrated players.
Yeah, I wanted first, I haven't talked to you, Tim, over the weekend, but I love the idea, the concept for the story. I don't know. Yeah, I don't think there's a whole lot of disagreement with with Price as number one. Some of this, I mean, obviously this is very subjective. We have Tui Alamaka at number 7. I think he could potentially be even higher than that, but I think he's well slotted there. You didn't list anybody in an order that I disagreed with, but I do believe I agree with Weiss Guy in that Logan Thomas has a chance to move up from where he is at number 19, largely because of Botello's injury.
Yeah, I think for me, it's right up there with Logan Thomas and what can he do? Do one of those freshman defensive backs just soar into this ranking, like we've seen freshman defensive backs do under Marcus Freeman? I think all of those things are certainly elements to look at. Josh Burnham's guy I'm pretty high on. Yeah, I agree very strongly with Jalen Sneed. Like Jalen Sneed coming out of high school was that 5-star kid. He was the guy that Notre Dame first beat out a bunch of SEC and Clemson type programs to get. He was Marcus Freeman's real first signature commitment with Notre Dame. So he's certainly a guy that you can see in that is, those are some of the ones that I looked at when I looked at the other 22 and thought, but yeah, the Logan Thomas, I think can be a guy that can absolutely soar up those boards. And Jason Onye, again, like if he plays like a 5th or 6th year senior, I would probably also say it would be tremendous for Notre Dame if Micah Gilbert proves better than number 18 on Tim O'Malley's list.
Where Priester subjective is the proper word, because I was kind of looking at Burris and Gilbert like, I guess I'm going to try to get my opinion across here and put him one in front of him to make it.
Yeah, no, kind of like when we do the counting counting
Right.
down the Irish,
Yeah. Yeah.
you do something similar to that. I could see Dallas Golden playing, a significant
Right.
role as well, just because of his ability. I'm fascinated by Ty Washington because nobody gives any consideration to Ty Washington because we didn't see him in the spring. But I think that, Notre Dame didn't just reach out and grab a guy from Arkansas who had some quote discipline issues at Arkansas, unless they feel he has a specific asset that he can bring to the
Right.
equation. And what that likely would be is the ability to be a really dynamic blocking tight end.
By the way, Priester, when you go down the road of these stories, I was thinking to myself, I wonder if JD Price started because that's going to ruin him being number one. I looked there and was like, 0 starts in 16 games. Perfect story. JD Price. Here we go. Because
Was
you
that
never know, a guy could play the first snap, and you could, like, TJ
sure?
Jones was MVP. I think he started like 6 games or something along those lines because you go into a different package. But no starts means you're a
Well,
non-starter, no matter how you look at it.
I was one of the foolish ones that thought that Price would be the starter when the season began, months prior to the start
Right.
of the
Right. Right.
season,
Right.
knowing full well what Love was capable of. But I mean, Dealer McCullough loved Jadarian Price from the moment he started working with him.
Mhm.
He elevated him immediately in his mind and on the depth chart as soon as he started working with him.
Got a two-parter here for JB mostly, so I'm going to read one at a time. A question for John Bryce from Tech76. Will midnight on June 30th bring a big reduction in the level of commitment/decommitment activity regarding the 26 class? As I understand it, payments from school NIL cooperatives made before that June 30 midnight deadline will not be subject to the Deloitte review. If that is true, it would seem everyone's strategy would be to prepay NIL over the next 8 days to avoid any scrutiny of those payments.
Well, there's some yes and no involved there. Yes, that is what programs around the country are doing. There are some significantly heavy loaded contracts. I've tried to allude to this, heavy front loaded contracts that I've tried to allude to. Technically, once Judge Claudia Wilkin approved the House settlement on June 6th, that Friday evening, the next day, June 7th, all NIL deals worth more than $600 we're supposed to start going through the Deloitte clearinghouse at that time. There's not been any public knowledge of how many deals have been sent through Deloitte since that time. But when the House settlement was approved June 6th, part of the settlement approval, they came out and said, was now beginning June 7th, all NIL deals should go through Deloitte. So it really wouldn't even just be the last couple of weeks. It would be the NIL deals that were constructed and offered before June 6th and the settlement passing. There are a huge amount of front-loaded deals out there. I've touched on this. I'll teach on this, or I'll touch on this again. I know I've referenced numerous times the DFO meetings, just because it's the single most beneficial thing from a knowledge standpoint that I do in a given year. It's far more valuable for me to go to those DFO meetings every year in Texas than it is for me to go to the AFCA convention. The AFCA convention is better networking. The DFO meetings are much greater depth of knowledge. So anyway, at those meetings, be it NCAA people, be it GMs in the room, be it DFOs in the room, there was considerable talk about the front-loaded nature of those deals. There was considerable talk about how guys were going to get hellaciously large paychecks this month, and then in December, they were going to look and realize they made a lot less the last 6 months of the year than they made the first 6 months of the year, even though the last 6 months of the year entailed the college football season. So that's kind of what everyone is waiting for. What happens over the course of this fall when guys are making much less money than they were even 6 months ago? Are they realizing that they were making $50,000 a month the first 6 months of the year because they were going to be making $25,000 a month the last 6 months of the year, but that it all balances out to what they were promised? Or are they just pissed off that suddenly they go from making 50,000 a month to 25,000 a month? So that's a very real part of it. That's a really good question from Tech 76. I would also say that does it have a big reduction in the decommitment activity? It depends. There are a lot of schools out there that if they're in an NIL friendly state, they're getting these kids already engaged in NIL opportunities at the high school level. I know for a fact there are high school kids out there making significant NIL money that are already committed to power conference programs. If they decommit, The buyouts and contracts are really real. And people have asked this question a bunch. The buyouts and contracts are absolutely happening, and they're happening at the high school level. I think that's the important thing to stress is that guys who are getting paid now, guys who are part of some very, very prominent classes on the national scene right now, if something happens and they don't end up going to that school and they've been collecting money for the last 6 months because they were a high profile commit in January, they owe some money back to that NIL.
That's a rough one. I think you basically answered this. I'm going to break down. Hemi wanted to know, is Joey O'Brien subject to this house settlement? He asked as an example because he is neither a past or current player, as it's worded that way.
Yeah, look, it all depends on the NIL laws where Joey O'Brien is there. How lax are they? How much can he capitalize on it? Again, he's not part of the settlement in that regard. The
Right.
the NCAA cannot dictate what any high school athlete is making right now. That goes back to state NIL laws, and that goes back to the respective recruitments and how much the collectives are operating there. That probably is the next frontier. Like I wrote last week with the South Dakota AD, but a number of ADs are saying, "Hey, we can now give your donations to us directly, not to the collectives." And there are a number of schools that are now giving rewards points or donor points for those donations that technically go in the general fund. They're being used to fund revenue sharing and all of that. So this may be where collectives try to crop up the most and continue to have outsized influence will be with the younger kids because ADs want them gone by and large at the collegiate level.
Next from GR Irish Fan 22. On numerous previous podcasts, a lot of discussion and comments from you four, Priester, Bryce, O'Malley, and Pete, pertain to the QB position insinuates CJ Carr will win the job. Do you all know something we don't? Or is your confidence in him winning the job simply that high? If it's the latter, what is that based upon? Seems none of the discussions related to QB really give Mitchie a chance at winning the job.
What we think we know is that the highest ceiling belongs to Carr, that the NFL caliber quarterback between the two is Carr, that is accurate, that the most accurate quarterback of the two is Carr. I don't think I'm not purposely trying to discount Minchie. A lot of times it's just as opposed to having to explain that in August there will be a battle and they will determine within the first couple of weeks of August who the winner is. I personally have just kind of skipped that process. I do expect CJ Carr to win the job. We all, O'Malley, Bryce, and I sat down with Marcus Freeman a few weeks ago, and he said it is an open competition to be won by one of two quarterbacks competing for it. I believe him to a large extent. I also think that CJ Carr is the better of the two quarterbacks and will win the job.
Yeah, look, if this was 2022, Kenny Minchie would be the starter, in my opinion. I think he would beat out Drew Pine and Tyler Buckner. I think right now CJ Carr is really ascendant. I've touched on before how much he did last summer already to start showcasing some leadership skills. How he and his mom went to Costco there in town and bought, I forget how many hundreds of dollars of burgers and dogs and supplies and hosted a giant cookout for all of his teammates. He's organized stuff this summer. Not that Kenny Minchie hasn't. Kenny Minchie has a great rapport among his teammates and has really strengthened some bonds there. I just think that CJ Carr is doing the things a little bit better than Kenny Minchie to position himself to be the starting quarterback. And I agree. I think that like when you just hear how CJ Carr carried himself, how he responded to Angeli's departure, the things he did over the course of spring that he's carried into the summer, I think those are all the things that continue to show you that CJ Carr is who I also expect to win the starting quarterback battle.
Next question from New One. We know Dan pretty well, friend of the show. Take yourselves back to the beginning of NIL and tell us what you thought the future of ND football would be and why. Now look to the future. Is there anything else ND needs to do other than stay the course? I think it's a fascinating question because the beginning of NIL, as Priester pointed out, maybe on the podcast last week, I lose track of that as well, when you noted they did not think they were getting it. Jack Swarbrick did not see NIL at Notre Dame the way NIL is at Notre Dame
Yeah.
right now.
Eric, why don't you jump in there?
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting question because when you look at the reticence that was, I think, within the Notre Dame boosters to really engage with NIL in its current form when it first started, and kind of the perceived gap that was building there, right? Like the narrative for a while was Notre Dame's behind. They need to get more competitive here. They need to be more involved and pressing this button, really kind of pushing this. And looking at it now, it is really interesting based on what we've heard, especially from the commitments over the last couple of weeks. And I'll kind of leave it there. But I can say that Notre Dame has definitely upped the aggressiveness, even since I started on this beat, which is what, April of last year, so a little over a year. Um, the aggressiveness has taken a marked step up for Notre Dame on all fronts, and I think the biggest thing when you talk about like the value of NIL with Notre Dame football is the one consistent theme from beginning to end is that Notre Dame was willing to pay for retention. When that opportunity came about, Notre Dame was willing to keep its rosters intact. So, from a fundamental standpoint, I think Notre Dame has always approached this with the most healthy outlook. They've approached this with the way that NIL was maybe more intentionally oriented when it was first broached, and they've approached this with more of the we want to keep this in a healthy place for college football outlook. I like to think that that has, sustained over time, even as the NIL market has shifted for Notre Dame. But really, as they've gotten more aggressive, I think everything has stayed sort of rooted in that. Notre Dame doesn't want to be that team who is resetting the market every other week, giving offers for prospects. They want to be the team that is making competitive, strategic, and smart investments in their football program, current and future. And so to base everything in that with a ramp up of aggressiveness as the rule set has changed, to the back end of that question, I don't know that Notre Dame needs to do much other than stay the course and just continue to monitor as these things shift. And this kind of came to mind as Bryce talked about this in a few questions ago. There are a few states right now that have specific laws regarding, basically submitting your NIL contract to Deloitte for third party. Michigan, Tennessee are two states that are actively saying that's anti competitive. They don't want to have to deal with that. Well, Notre Dame has several commits in Michigan and has made a significant investment in trying to ramp up its recruiting efforts in Michigan under Marcus Freeman. Obviously, CJ Carr's from there, several offensive linemen. So I guess if there's one thing that Notre Dame needs to monitor into the future, as a national recruiting brand, they are really going to need to be about their details with these individual state laws. And especially if they're going to be trying to get, contracts and commitments from schools like Michigan, Tennessee, or states, excuse me, like Michigan and Tennessee, they're going to need to monitor these little one offs that are emerging from the House settlement changes. That's something that I think is going to be very, very pressing for Notre Dame over these next couple of years as state governments really kind of react to some of these changes and create a sort of a very college football web of one-off instances across each state.
I
And
think
I would
like
just real super quickly add that's why the alliance is that's proposed out there is so important. And that's the technically the Power Five because they've included the Pac-12 commissioner in those talks along with Notre Dame. But that's where basically they're trying to have an alliance that says, okay, we've passed the House settlement. We have a $20.5 million revenue share. Let's stick to that. Let's all agree to operate within this framework. And a lot of this was spawned when Tennessee legislatively went earlier this year and had it pass laws saying like we're not going to be governed by the NCAA. We're still going to pay our student athletes regardless and whatever we want to pay them, and it's not going to be bound by the House settlement. And then Tennessee got in some trouble with the SEC because of that. Not just its peers in the SEC, but as SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey was not too pleased with that as well. So the alliance is important for everyone to monitor because you do want to see that type of agreement if you're interested in seeing the sport, particularly college football, but NCAA sports writ large, have some guardrails applied to them here moving forward July 1st and onward.
similar to a previous question we had, like why is Notre Dame all of a sudden rising up? I think everything starts with Marcus Freeman, and he's changed the trajectory of the Notre Dame program. But and Eric can speak to this more. I mean, you look at the guys that Notre Dame is recruiting, and they're appealing to the best of the best athletes that are coming from like college prep high schools.
Mm-hmm.
They're attracting attention from those people. Marcus Freeman talking about culture, that's resonating with families more now. Life after Notre Dame has become a significant part of what Notre Dame is about. It's led on campus by Amir Carlisle and Jack Shields. The story I did a couple weeks ago, the benefactor for the new facility, is heavily involved in land. We in our conversation, he must have said land 30 times. That's at the forefront of what's important to him now. So I think when you start adding all these things up, in addition to look at the sons of former NFL players that Notre Dame is attracting now. Notre Dame is resonating in ways that it hadn't before because of guys like Jack Shields, et cetera. But it all comes back to, when did all this really start happening? When Marcus Freeman became the head coach at Notre Dame.
He very early on in the process where, I guess when pay for play became what NIL was, when everybody gets paid on the roster, was like, this isn't going to be enough. Like, this isn't going to work. So in other words, he recognized the bad business of just deciding to do that. And that part of that is understanding, hey, we need to be aggressive in finding real NIL deals as well, because that's when you can retain players with that aggression. And then I think obviously it became important that they would get in a little bit on the not just retaining players aspect of NIL, because you need to get new players, Tim Priester, too, as you know, as the recruiting has gone quite well.
It has. Which question are we on here now? We are now on J. New. Indy has recently decided they want 6 offensive linemen in the class of 2026. Has there been players at O-line who seem to be looking at other options, not lived up to expectations, or not coming back from injuries as one would hope? Eric?
Go ahead, Eric.
No, yeah, not really. So if you want to take this like line by line here, I think the biggest thing about Notre Dame going from the perceived 5, which is where they were for a few months, to 6th, is just about opportunity. Notre Dame has 3 excellent interior prospects, like straight interior prospects in the class, and that would be Sullivan Garvin at center, Ben Nichols at guard, and then Tyler Merrill at guard. They also have an appealing swing option in Gregory Patrick. He could be like a right tackle. He could play guard. He originally was kind of looked at as a guy who, like, okay, maybe we'll start him at tackle. That's where we see it projecting. I think the biggest thing is that Notre Dame now recognized, if we can get another pure tackle, we don't have to worry about forcing Patrick to play guard or to play tackle. We can allow him to play guard and do what we need to do. So when Notre Dame had the opportunity to add Grayson McKee and Charlie Tom, I think the biggest thing about that was they see McKee as a excellent prospect, a top flight potential left tackle, and as someone who is a worthy fit into that offensive line unit, even after taking several top tackles last cycle. They feel like he can still come in and compete with that group. The other side of things is Notre Dame has been very, very privileged in recent history in that it doesn't have to go to the transfer portal for offensive linemen, with really one exception. They got the guy from Marshall, whose name I'm forgetting.
Kane Madden.
Kane Madden, yes, PFF legend who we'll leave it at
Yes,
that.
right.
But Notre Dame doesn't really need to go out and get offensive linemen in the transfer portal, which is a point of privilege. That is such a step ahead of the vast majority of schools in the country. And so when Notre Dame had a chance to add not only one of its top tackle prospects in McKee, but they could add Tom, who is a Notre Dame legacy, who is someone who you do not have to worry about 2 years from now. If he's not playing, he's going to jump in the transfer portal. And they worked him out a few weeks ago, and they thought, wow, this guy can move. We're really bullish on his future ability. Well, for Notre Dame, that's just good business, right? If you're not constrained to those 25 kids per class numbers like Bryce talked about on the show last week, what's the harm in taking a shot at a guy that you feel is going to be there for 4 years and going to add value at arguably the most important position group to get talent out of high school, just because of the difficulty to add talent otherwise? So for Notre Dame, I think this is just good process and an evolving picture of where do we want these pieces to slot in. You mentioned the McGlinchey quote, they're all tackles until they get here and then some play guards. Well, maybe for the first time, Notre Dame doesn't necessarily have to tell them all they're all tackles.
I also think, I think they're, when you look at players that you better really start stepping up on the offensive line. They lost Tai Chan recently. Tai Chan would have still been there.
This is how I looked at the question too, Tim.
Okay, yeah.
I'm glad Eric brought that perspective, because I'm with you. I'm looking at they're recruiting over something they might have to.
Tai Chan should technically still be there, and he isn't. Devin Houston was moved from O-line or from D-line to O-line. I think that was a good move for him, but boy, is the competition strong there. Joe Otting, Absher kind of passed him by in the spring at center. He's a little bit undersized. Styles Prescott got a lot of opportunities early in spring, but I'm not sure how high they are on him as a prospect, especially when you start looking at the offensive tackles they're going to have. And, Peter Jones is not a guy that we heard a lot of positive things when camp opened last year as a true freshman. I kind of like Chris Tarrick. I'm not really sure where he is in the pecking order, but I like his size and
he
his
was out of sight, out of mind with 2 surgeries for the spring.
exactly.
Remember, I mean,
exactly. So those would be. Is there anybody else, Tim? Those would be the guys that come to mind for me on the offensive line. I think they like Cam Herron, but he's just getting started.
Yeah.
He's undersized, but he is a center. I think they like his aggression. Those are just some of the guys that come to mind that's how I thought of the question as well.
I think Eric might have just made the best point of any of us on this entire podcast about the luxury of retaining almost all of their offensive linemen. The only other one I can think of is Sam Pendleton, but I've noted this before. I'll note it again. There was an FCS offensive lineman who went from FCS to a power conference program in this most recent. He'll play for the power conference team this fall. He got 1.3 million. There was another G5 offensive lineman who is now playing power conference football who got 1.5 million. These aren't hearsay. These are direct conversations I've had with people
tough
involved.
For me, JB. Isn't that tough? Do you think you'd pay a guy that when you're coming from the lower level?
And there's an FCS player who went to an ACC program on the D line who got 800,000 this year. So my point bringing that up and why I think Eric's comment is brilliant is that it shows you how much money Notre Dame is saving by having that kind of retention and being so smart with the way things are structured.
We have a question from the creative handle of ND_. How many?
It's accurate. I looked all over.
It is. It's
actually
great.
what it is. Yeah.
He obviously is the only one. Well done, ND_. How many more extra practices did Notre Dame get compared to Miami, for example, thanks to the deep playoff run? How many included early enrollees? Do you think it is notable advantage against Miami or won't make much of a difference in the opener on August 31st?
It's an intriguing question to me. It's 21 practices, right, guys? Is that what?
I think you've quoted the number before.
Yep.
I'm not sure I ever knew exactly what it was.
4 games, 21 practices. In terms of the early enrollees, it would just be 4. The 4 guys that came in. I mean, like Jadon Blair was playing wide receiver. Madden Framo was just getting kind of part of the program. I saw him watching offensive lineman at one point, remember? And I was like, I should report
well,
this.
He had the wrist injury.
He had the wrist injury. I was like,
I
need to just report that Madden Framo is standing with the offensive lineman and see what people do because that's where he was standing. Of course, Blake Hebert was able to kind of assimilate a little bit with Coach Gaduli. And then Ethan Long, right? Ethan Long was here. Mm-hmm. So he probably was the only one that played a position he was actually doing a lot of. We saw Framo repping after a while because it's good news when you're not sure who the supposedly high school senior is when you're repping down for the national championship game in Atlanta. He was part of the linebackers then. I think this is an underrated question, and it's an advantage that Notre Dame practiced that much and was able to rest their guys in the spring as the result of that practice.
Yeah, I think it would probably mean that they got 6 extra practices. Isn't that right? Don't bowl bursts supply 15 extra practices? So, I mean, Miami would have gotten additional practices for its bowl.
So, okay, so they would have gotten 9 more, right? 3 more. 3 more games than Miami. Miami played a bowl.
Yeah.
Notre Dame played 4 bowls, if you want to look at it that way.
Sure. So Notre Dame got much more valuable experience. I think the programs are in different positions because of that. But if you participate in a bowl, isn't it 15 bowl practices that you get?
Yes.
So Miami would have gotten 15 extra practices from the end of its regular season before its bowl game, whereas Notre Dame got 21 extra practices plus the extra games and the experience of being on the ride. So I do think that Notre Dame is a better, deeper program because of its run. I don't think by the time that August 31st rolls around that it's an overwhelming advantage for Notre Dame.
To answer the question, I would say yes, it makes a difference, and I would say no, it doesn't make a difference. No, from the standpoint, like if you're talking about young guys getting meaningful reps, Notre Dame's trying to win a national title. I mean, the young guys that were prep team guys during the regular season are still young guys working on the prep team during the the playoff run. So I don't know that they necessarily get a whole lot of more quality reps. In most instances, they don't. However, when you make a run to the national championship, every person in that program is around this quest for championships and believing and getting up for another big game and winning a big game and celebrating a big game and then starting the process all over for the Orange Bowl and the national championship. Any team that's around winning and preparing to win championships on any level of any sport anywhere benefits from it. I was part of two teams that made a run to the state championship in high school baseball, 3A in Indiana. It helped our program immeasurably just for kids to be around that level of championship quest.
Let me say real quickly, because I just double checked, there's actually not an NCAA minimum or maximum of bowl practices. What you do is you still have the 20-hour a week rule. So you can structure that however you want to. Most teams have gone and adopted it very similar to a spring camp, and they will use 15 practices and they're 20 hours a week. But Miami at max got 20 hours a week from the end of its season, and then when the bowl was announced until it played the bowl. So certainly you're probably closer to right, T.O. Notre Dame probably ended up getting 9 more practices than Miami as opposed to 6 or something like that. So again, I do think it's an advantage, but I think the overall advantage is the run that Notre Dame went on, what it engendered in the program, and the quality depth that continued to be honed along that run.
To add one thing to that, as Priester pointed out, the early enrollees that we mentioned practiced and were involved in practice, but almost everybody was, not all of them we found out through interviews, but the grad transfers coming in, the transfers coming in, and the early enrollees were in Atlanta. I mean, they got to experience that sitting behind the Notre Dame bench, and a lot of them have talked about it, how I just find it really intriguing when a grad transfer comes in and he comes to watch his new program play for the national championship and he's not there yet. Like, it just seems to be that, of course, in a high school senior to be would love to do that, but it's really cool someone like Jalen Stroman is doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I hadn't anticipated that was the case, and it was in a couple instances. We're going to wrap up with Maltese Irish. The question is, we're accustomed to hearing things like the visit was great, or they're definitely in the running. I'm looking over my camera. Definitely in the running for a prospect. Can you think of the time a recruit said anything unsavory about Notre Dame, their visit or prospect of them choosing Notre Dame in their post-visit interviews? I know the offensive.
Yes. Yes, there are good answers to this. I'll start with the first bit. Visit was great. The reason you hear it so commonly is because 9 times out of 10, when I text someone from feedback, that's the first response. Just like auto-generated, it sends back. So I include it because apparently the visit went great. There is one sort of an all-timer of, oh, he's not coming to Notre Dame. It is one of my favorite stories. We did a very thoughtful, full day of visit, prep, and work to show Garrett Wilson a good time. 5-star receiver, Garrett Wilson. And he walked into Coach Kelly's office at the end of that visit and said, "Thanks for everything. I'm going to go check out Ohio State, and I'm going to choose between Texas and Ohio State." And then he left. And I remember Coach Kelly's bemused face walking into the recruiting lounge like, what the hell just happened? What did he just say to me? And him describing that to Aaron Carney was awesome. Another flip side of things, good feedback. There was a few players who gave really, really good feedback, and we thought, okay, we have a good chance with them. There was a certain offensive lineman who went to Stanford, and I don't know if he wants the name out there, so I'll give him a little grace. I remember we did a series of meetings with academics folks, and normally these meetings go great, right? It's Notre Dame academics. It's very rare that someone leaves these meetings like, that wasn't that impressive. And I will never forget, we're walking out of this meeting, and I was like, so how was it? And he goes, I don't know, Stanford was better. What do you even say to that? Like, I think my brain shut down. It was like, I don't even know what I'm supposed to do at this point. So I think he's going to Stanford, and he did. So
maybe TP remembers. Aren't there some pretty famous stories about Randy Moss's recruiting visit to Notre Dame?
Oh, I think that was.
Yeah, I don't know what to believe on that one though.
Yeah, because
he tells a different story. Like it
was.
That.
Yeah, it was all over the place. I mean, I think the popular story then was that Randy was flipping about virtually anything, especially
Swimming pools and waffles and all of that.
The adoration of Notre Dame. I mean, I think he was probably flippant about everything. I'm really trying to remind her and remind or remember who the offensive line, and this is famous. Notre Dame famously, their offensive linemen, at least under Harry Hiestand, would pretty much dictate who Notre Dame was going to continue to recruit along the
Right.
offensive line and wouldn't. If the offensive lineman didn't approve, the kid had no chance of being accepted by Harry Hiestand himself. He let his players determine who belonged at Notre Dame and who didn't.
I can't remember who that was either. I do have two good stories.
Eric, does that?
Oh, it rings a bell. I just don't know who. Eric, do you know who he's talking about? There?
I feel like there's about 3 or 4 guys that could be.
Okay, probably true. Tim, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. So in 2011, the famous class where Brian Kelly didn't really have his footing, but he brought in a lot of good players, and it didn't work out because a lot of them had to transfer and not get in. So I'm sorry. This was 2012.
That's
after
where
that.
Bruce Hedgie gets mentioned.
T. Shepard
Ooh.
on his interview with the person who interviewed him. I'll leave that out too for Notre Dame. He's like, so he came in for the USC, the famous USC game where they tried out the music and the new helmets and everything, and they face planted. It was a bad loss. Last time they lost to USC at home, by the way. They asked Shepard what his visit was like. He goes, I don't know, kind of boring. And he's like, all right, well, who was your host? Well, I don't remember. What did you do? Oh, I don't know. We went out and then I went home or something like that. He's like, T, is this really how you want this to be reported? This situation like that. He's like, and then Shepard's like, okay, well, I'll give you some more. I think I'll try to figure out who did it, and the guys, of course, the reporters are like, well, he's not going to Notre Dame. Lo and behold, he tried to go Notre Dame. T. Shepard. So I don't know how that happened. The best one, and I now officially, this is the only hint I can give you, cannot give you the name of the person that told me this story. Ron Artest came to Notre Dame for a visit. He told the person that was hosting him, let's just go find somewhere where we can play basketball, the two of us. I'm not coming here. And the guy's like, all right, let's go play basketball. He goes, yeah, let's just go play basketball. I'm here. Thanks for having me here. I don't want to come here, but I want to go play basketball. And they played basketball for like the full day on the visit. That was how he goes, you don't need to show me the places. I'm not coming here. It's like, all right, but they played basketball. He's like, nicest guy in the world. They just played basketball on the visit, and he left and declined to come to Notre Dame. I found that so intriguing.
Well, Wilson, the wide receiver at Ohio State, there's got to be like, okay, well, we don't have to piss around with him anymore.
I mean, I think that's better. It's better, isn't it, than saying how much you love it and then lead him on. You're one of my top 3 and all that. And he said, we're the top 3 for the next 6 months.
Exactly.
JB, there's got to be some Tennessee stories like that, man.
Yeah, too many. I don't know. Torrance Gibson always comes to mind. He was a big one. He was just all over the place. There were a number of Florida kids that were coming that, Lane Kiffin actually just talked about this when he got hired at Tennessee. AJ McCarron was committed, and he was coming to Knoxville on a visit, and they were trying to keep anybody from finding out about it. And this story just became public a couple of weeks ago. But Nick Saban sent Jeremy Pruitt, who was then just an analyst who he had hired away from Hoover High School, where Nick Saban had just magically gotten Julio Jones. And then he hired Jeremy Pruitt. So you can follow the trail as to why you can no longer hire people directly from the high school where they coached a guy who comes and changes your program around. Anyway, Nick Saban sends Jeremy Pruitt to guard AJ McCarron's house, and he stakes out the wrong house, and the entire Tennessee coaching contingent still gets to AJ McCarron's house and has their visit and sits with him for an in-home visit and all of this stuff. So that's probably the one that I've known about for a really long time. Lane Kiffin just recently shared some of that. It was corroborated by some others. AJ McCarron talked about it on one of his podcasts. That's probably my favorite. Another one I have, one of my all-time favorite stories that I ever did was I spent the day with Eric Berry for a feature for Yahoo and Rivals back in the day. I mean, I went to his 6:30 a.m. workout with him. I went to classes with him. I did the whole deal with him. And I was riding in his car with him and his girlfriend to lunch, and we were talking about the recruiting process. And I said, well, how'd Georgia let you get away? Yeah, his dad was a former Vol, but he grew up in Fairburn, Georgia, which is maybe 50 miles or so from Athens. And he said, when I went in for my visit with Mark Richt, He didn't even know who I was. I saw that he had Eric Berry written on his hand so that he would know my name.
Whoa.
That's
Wow.
my favorite.
We could do more of these because I thought of a couple more, but we're running along here. I have a good one from a friend of mine that played for Florida State. We'll get to that one some other time because I'm sure Pete Sampson has some good stories for this one. Tim Priester, and we'll be seeing him soon. Until then, we will be back actually this Thursday. Actually, as we know, JB will be down at DFO meetings, but this Thursday, coaches meeting. Sorry, Tim Priester and Pete Sampson and I will get together for a podcast on the 23rd. Until then, thank you, Eric Thomas, for joining us. You were right. We needed to wait for this all to be over, and thank goodness we didn't try to squeeze that in earlier because a lot of stuff happened by the time the 23rd rolled around, Eric. For Eric Thomas.
Just won't slow down.
Yes, thanks. Yeah, no, you hope not, right? Timetable recruiting is here, and it's in the good kind. For Eric Thomas and Tim Priester of Irish Illustrated, John Bryce of Football Scoop, I'm Tim O'Malley. Thanks for watching and listening to Irish Illustrated Insider.